Hi guys. Tonight we travel far back in time past your glowing fridge light, past even the first iceboxes to a world where food turns sour in a day if you're careless. You stand barefoot on packed earth, in the middle of a medieval village that smells of wood smoke and damp hay. The morning sun is pale, the roosters impatient, and there's no hum of electricity, no gentle chill of a machine humming in the corner. Everything you eat must survive the fickleness of weather, the hunger of pests, and the unstoppable hand of rot. You probably won't survive this. To be honest, not without knowing a few tricks the peasants did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere across the world, post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, and let's step into the story. You trudge through the mud toward the village green, and you can already hear the clang of iron from the smithy and the muffled bleating of goats. Life moves by the rhythm of chores: milk, grind, fetch, stir, mend, repeat. The seasons decide everything. You glance at the cottage next to yours, its thatched roof holding the faint scent of last night's smoke. From that smoke hangs hope, meat that will last through winter. Without preservation, every meal is a race against decay. A turnip left in the sun shrivels to leather, milk turns in hours. Even bread baked with such effort grows mold before you can finish the loaf. So medieval peasants become quiet alchemists of endurance. They learn that time is both enemy and ingredient. They salt, smoke, ferment, dry, bury, seal, and pray. And every technique smells different, sounds different. Crackling logs, the hiss of brine, the drone of flies kept at bay with herbs. The peasant's world is defined by fragility, yet it hums with inventiveness. A woman stirring her pot knows exactly how long her cabbage must boil before she layers it in a clay jar with salt. She doesn't need thermometers or pH meters, just the wisdom passed down from hands now buried under churchyard soil. There's comfort in that continuity. You might notice it feels strangely intimate, as though the kitchen itself is alive, whispering advice through centuries of repetition. Mainstream historians agree that by the 13th century, European villages had developed sophisticated preservation customs: salting meat, storing grain in elevated granaries, drying herbs in bunches above smoky hearths. But these weren't inventions of luxury, they were survival's last line. Hunger visited every winter like a tax collector. A poor harvest meant thin soup and quieter laughter. The quirky part? Some villagers believed certain foods wanted to live. You might catch someone murmuring to their cheese or gently thanking a smoked ham before cutting it. It wasn't madness, it was gratitude in a world where food had personality. Scholars studying rural folklore still find echoes of this belief in old blessings said over loaves of bread. You take another step, your wooden clogs squelching. The air is full of scent, peat, manure, thyme. Near the well, an old man sharpens a blade while his wife kneels nearby, washing leeks in cold water. Every gesture is unhurried because rushing doesn't help anything keep longer. Even the concept of freshness feels odd here. Fresh food means risk, it must be eaten fast. Preserved food means safety, certainty, and a whisper of pride. You peer into your own cottage. It's dim, smoky, warm near the hearth and cool near the floor. Clay pots line a low shelf, each sealed with wax or covered by a damp cloth. Above your head, hanging from rafters blackened by years of smoke, are bundles of dried herbs and something that looks like a small boar's leg. You smile faintly, relieved you won't go hungry yet. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants fully understood the cause of spoilage. Some say they sensed invisible forces at work. Others think they blamed spirits or imbalanced humors. But you, living it, don't need theories. You've seen milk curdle on a hot afternoon. You know instinctively that darkness, dryness, and salt buy time. And there's beauty in that practicality. Preservation is art disguised as routine. You don't brag about it. You just know that every jar of pickled onion is a small act of defiance against chaos. Your hands are cracked from lye soap, your back aches, but the satisfaction of hearing a cork pop in midwinter revealing cabbage still crisp, or ale still lively, feels almost holy. As night approaches, the day's heat seeps out of the earth. The village quiets except for the croak of frogs by the ditch. You crouch near the hearth, adjusting a pot so that tomorrow's meal will simmer slowly, drawing out the last of the broth's flavor. Tomorrow you'll trade a handful of smoked eels for grain. The barter economy feeds not just mouths, but friendships. Outside, a dog barks once, and then lies down again. You can smell the faint metallic tang of rain in the air. You think of all the ways the world conspires to spoil your food, heat, dampness, mice, mold, and how each solution you've learned pushes back just a little. Humanity, at this moment in history, is balancing on the thin edge between plenty and famine. In your half-sleeping state, the flicker of fire becomes hypnotic. You think about future generations opening their humming refrigerators, never worrying if bread will last the week. They might never know this satisfaction, the quiet pride of storing something well, of winning a small victory over time itself. You breathe in the warm, smoky air and feel yourself drifting, surrounded by the knowledge that survival, here, is handmade. Tomorrow, you'll wake and reach for a slab of salted pork. The crystals will glint like frost under your fingertips, reminding you that even without winter's ice, you've captured a little bit of cold permanence. And as you close your eyes tonight, you realize every meal that lasts another day is a miracle carved from patience. You wake early, long before the roosters. The cottage smells faintly of ashes and damp straw, and there's a thin mist creeping through the open door. The day begins with a soft grey light and the promise of labour. Today, your task is precious and costly. You will use salt, the white treasure of the medieval world. It is simple, yet it commands more respect than some noble families do. Salt is life. Without it, meat rots, fish stinks, and vegetables collapse into slime. With it, food lasts through the lean months. That is why it travels farther than any pilgrim. Ships cross rough seas to bring blocks of it from southern mines. Caravans wind through mountains, their mules burdened with sacks that glitter faintly in the sunday. Even kings tax it, counting every grain as profit. You, a peasant, might save for weeks just to buy a handful. You scoop some into your palm. The crystals are sharp and cold, like frozen tears. They sting a tiny cut on your finger, and you wince, but you also smile. That sting means safety. When you rub it into a slab of pork, you are locking out death itself. The salt draws moisture away, making a crust that no unseen pest can live in. You do not know the word bacteria, but you understand that what you cannot see, you can still defeat. A mainstream historical fact says that entire towns, such as Salzburg and Lüneburg, rose to power because of salt. People called it white gold, and wars were fought over it. In some regions, salt could even be used to pay taxes or dowries. It flavored more than food, it flavored politics. When you sprinkle it into your brine, you are tasting history's oldest contract. Labor traded for endurance. In your village, salt arrives in small clay pots wrapped in cloth. You keep yours hidden near the hearth, where it stays dry. Sometimes you barter eggs or woven baskets for it. The merchant always counts carefully, his tongue wetting his thumb before each pinch, making sure he gives no more than he must. You do not argue. You know he risks much bringing it here through bandit roads and swollen rivers. The air in your cottage smells of smoke and salt now. On the table lies a small pile of pork belly. You rub it thoroughly, pressing hard so the crystals reach deep. Then you place it into a wooden tub, layering meat and salt in patient rhythm. The sound is faint, like snow falling. You cover it with a cloth and leave it in the cool corner where shadows cling longest. Outside, chickens scratch at the ground. Somewhere down the lane, someone is boiling brine for fish. The whole village hums with quiet preservation. There is no haste, only rhythm. This is a day for patience, not feasting. A quirky fact often surprises modern people. In medieval times, salt was not always white. Some was grey, pink, even brownish, depending on the mine and the minerals within it. In Normandy, for example, salt came mixed with fine clay, which some believed gave it extra strength. You imagine a neighbour insisting that grey salt keeps meat better than white. Maybe he is right. Maybe he just likes to sound wise. You stretch your back and glance at your small stash of dried herbs, sage, thyme, a bit of dill. You decide to crush a handful and mix it into the next layer of salt, adding flavour as well as magic. No one in your time doubts that herbs have protective power. Whether it is their scent driving away evil spirits or their taste masking decay, they belong in every good curing tub. Historians still debate whether salt curing methods were standardized across medieval Europe. Some evidence suggests shared knowledge through monastic networks. Monks kept meticulous records of how long to soak hams, how often to turn barrels, even what kind of wood to use for smoke. Others argue that preservation was a deeply local craft, adapted to each climate and superstition. In truth, both may be correct. You follow no written guide, only what your mother's mother taught with her hands. The afternoon light softens as you walk toward the village well. Your neighbor greets you with a grin, his teeth bright against his tanned face. He holds up a small pot of salt as if it were gold. He plans to cure river fish tonight. You nod approvingly, sharing a look of silent understanding. Salt, after all, is not just food's guardian. It is the invisible thread that binds the community. When you lend a pinch to a friend, it is as meaningful as lending time. The smell of brine follows you back home. You stir it once more, feeling its slick texture against your fingers. Soon the meat will begin to firm, its color deepening, its weight changing. You mark the passage of time not by calendars but by transformation. In a few weeks, you will hang these pieces above the fire to dry, the salt having done its quiet work. As dusk arrives, you sit by the hearth, staring into the flames. You think about distant places where salt comes from, caves deep under mountains, vast white fields near the sea. You imagine workers chiseling crystals by torchlight, coughing in the dust, their sweat staining the same element that preserves your meat. You feel strangely connected to them. Across continents and centuries, you are both fighting the same decay. The night grows cold, and the salt tub gleams faintly in the dark. You listen to the crackle of burning wood and the faint hoot of an owl outside. Tomorrow, the same work will continue. More rubbing, more layering, more patience. There is no invention here, no new trick, only repetition perfected over time. Yet it feels almost sacred. You lie down at last, the scent of salt and smoke clinging to your hair. You dream of ocean winds and shining crystals, of an endless supply that never runs out. But when you wake, you will still measure each pinch carefully, because here, in your fragile world, a little salt is worth its weight in hope. The next morning greets you with the soft crackle of firewood and a haze of grey smoke coiling near the rafters. It clings to everything you own, from your wool tunic to the drying herbs above the hearth. You cough lightly, yet the smell is strangely comforting. Smoke is a friend here, one of the few that never abandons you in winter. Today, you will make it work for you. You drag a small stool closer to the hearth and peer upward. A thick beam stretches across the ceiling, dark with centuries of soot. From it dangle strings of sausages, slabs of meat, and bunches of herbs that sway gently whenever a breeze slips through the cracks in the wall. The air above the fire is warmer, drier, and alive with invisible motion. This is your smokehouse, your security, your quiet promise that hunger will stay outside the door a little longer. Smoke, you learn, is a slow artist. It paints everything it touches. The flavor of your food will depend on what kind of wood you burn. Oak gives a strong, hearty scent, while applewood whispers of sweetness. Alder burns clean and mild. You must choose carefully because whatever you feed your fire will later feed your body. The entire process is a kind of slow alchemy. Mainstream historians note that smokehouses were common by the High Middle Ages, sometimes built as separate huts with small vents and dirt floors. Poorer peasants like you used their homes instead, letting meat hang high above the hearth. The smoke not only dried it but also coated it in antimicrobial compounds that few could name, but everyone trusted. It was science without vocabulary, chemistry performed by instinct. You reach up, feeling the heat on your arm as you adjust a slab of salted pork. The outer layer has darkened, sticky to the touch, the salt drawing out moisture that now glistens like dew. The rhythm of your day is slow, deliberate. Stoke the fire, turn the meat, wait. Patience is the secret ingredient. The children might complain of the smell, but they will be grateful when snow blankets the fields. A curious detail floats through your mind, one told by travelers from the north. They say in Norway and Iceland, people hang fish and even sheep heads in open sheds, letting the cold wind and smoke work together. The meat grows hard as wood and lasts for months. Some claim it tastes better the longer it dries, though you are not sure whether that is courage or madness. Still, you admire the idea of letting the air itself help you preserve life. You sit by the fire and poke the embers, sending up a burst of sparks. The room flickers in orange light. Around you the walls are lined with soot patterns, reminders of every meal saved from ruin. Smoke is both curse and blessing. It stains your lungs and your skin, but it keeps hunger away. You breathe deeply and decide the trade is fair. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers smoked food mainly for taste or preservation. Some evidence suggests that it began as a way to keep insects and rodents from infesting hanging meat. Others insist that flavor was always the hidden motive. You do not see the difference. To you, survival and taste are the same thing. A well-smoked ham makes the long months of cold easier to bear. You listen to the faint hiss of sap in the wood. The logs pop, sending small sparks into the air. It is almost like rain, but warmer, friendlier. Your eyes sting a little, yet the rhythmic motion of fire calms you. It is hypnotic. You can almost feel time slowing down as the smoke curls upward. Outside, the fields are quiet. Autumn leaves scatter along the path to the granary. Somewhere, someone is singing softly as they mend a fishing net. The entire village is busy securing the future one small task at a time. A salted ham here, a barrel of dried beans there. It is collective patience. A quiet war against hunger fought with smoke and salt instead of swords. You remember the first time you tried smoking meat on your own. The fire burned too hot, and the ham turned bitter. You were embarrassed, but your neighbor laughed kindly and said, "The smoke must kiss, not bite." You never forgot that. Since then, every time you light a fire, you think of it as a conversation rather than a command. The smoke listens if you are gentle. As dusk approaches, you hang another cut of pork and close the shutters to keep out the damp air. The room glows faintly through the haze, a floating golden mist. Your hands smell of wood and salt, and you feel proud in a quiet, steady way. No one will write your name in a book, but your work will feed the living. That is legacy enough. You glance toward the small window. The last light of day glints off the surface of a wooden bowl filled with ash. You will use it later to seal a jar of beans, or maybe to clean the pots. Nothing is wasted here. Everything, even smoke, becomes useful. Before sleep, you check the fire one last time. The coals glow like a red heartbeat. The air is thick, but you are used to it. You lie down on the straw bed, close your eyes, and still see the patterns of light dancing behind your eyelids. The smell of smoke wraps around you like a blanket. Tomorrow, the meat will be darker, firmer, safer. You smile faintly. In your dreams, the smoke turns to fog drifting over fields, and you imagine the entire village sleeping under a single, shared haze of protection. The night hums softly, and hunger stays away, waiting patiently for a mistake that never comes. The morning light creeps through the small window, painting a pale stripe across your table. Today the air smells faintly sharp. the scent of vinegar rising from a wooden barrel tucked beside the hearth. You lift the lid, and the sour tang pinches your nose. It is not pleasant, not exactly, yet you know it means safety. In a world without ice or cold storage, vinegar is your ally, a liquid wall between food and decay. You pick up a wooden spoon and stir the contents slowly. Floating inside are slices of cabbage, onions, and a few small cucumbers from the last harvest. The liquid is cloudy but clean. Its surface catches the light like a thin sheet of glass. This is more than food. It is foresight, bottled and humming quietly beneath the surface. Women in your village guard their pickling secrets the way knights guard armor. Each family has its own recipe. The right ratio of salt to vinegar, the herbs added for flavor, the time needed before tasting. Some say a jar must rest through 3 full moons before it reaches perfection. Others swear by 7 days and a prayer to Saint Martha. No one can agree, but everyone claims their way is best. Records from the period show that vinegar making was often the work of women known as alewives, skilled not just in brewing ale but also in managing fermentation of every kind. Their cottages smelled of yeast, fruit, and smoke. The vats lined along their walls bubbled quietly, holding the future of the village's food supply. In some towns, alewives even sold vinegar to neighbors who lacked the tools or patience to make their own. You ladle a bit of the brine and taste it on your fingertip. It bites, sharp and alive. That sourness means success. Vinegar is both creation and accident. The child of wine that turned too long in the Sunday, many of the best discoveries begin with mistakes. A curious rumor often drifts between the cottages. Some people believe that if you whisper a blessing while sealing the jar, the vinegar will never spoil. It might sound superstitious, but you whisper anyway. There is comfort in habit. You press the wax-sealed lid tight, feeling it warm under your fingers as it hardens. The jar joins others on a shelf in the dim corner of the room. Your thoughts wander to the trade routes that make this possible. Somewhere far away, merchants haul barrels of wine through damp ports, some of which will sour along the way. Instead of wasting it, they sell it as vinegar. Nothing is wasted here, not even failure. You imagine that, centuries later, people might still drizzle this same flavor on salads in quiet kitchens lit by electric light. The taste of vinegar carries centuries in a single drop. Scholars remain divided over whether vinegar was valued more for its taste or its disinfecting power. Some medical manuscripts describe it as a purifier, capable of driving away sickness from food and air. Others focus purely on preservation, praising its ability to harden vegetables and keep them crisp through the bleak winter. You, however, do not need a book to tell you its worth. You have seen barrels survive both frost and flood, their contents still bright with life. You open the shutters, and the smell of soil and damp grass floats in. The market bell rings in the distance. Somewhere, an alewife is shouting prices for her jars, her voice strong and confident. She holds the knowledge of centuries in her hands, though she cannot write a single word. People respect her craft because it touches everyone's hunger. In the afternoon, you gather wild herbs for flavoring: dill, mustard seed, and a few cloves of garlic. You crush them with a stone, their aroma rising like memory. The scent is powerful enough to make your stomach growl. As the mixture joins the vinegar, the air fills with something bright and alive. This moment, when the ingredients meet, feels like a spell being cast. A chronicler of the 14th century once wrote that vinegar keeps what the sun began, meaning that it captured summer's energy in liquid form. You think about that as you swirl the jar in your hands. The colors glow faintly in the light. Even in the depth of winter, this will remind you of fields warm with bees and grain. Before sleep, you sit near the fire and listen to the faint popping sound from the jars as they cool and seal. It is the sound of time slowing down, of decay halted for a little while. You take comfort in it. Preservation is patience, and patience is survival. You wonder what people centuries ahead will preserve and how they will remember the smell of vinegar in a wooden house at dusk. The night closes around the cottage. The sour scent fades to something softer, sweeter. You lie down with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has turned ordinary labor into a small kind of magic. Outside, the moon rises, pale and round, and somewhere in the dark a barrel sighs as air escapes its lid. You smile faintly and drift into sleep, dreaming of jars lined like soldiers, standing guard against hunger. The first frost comes quietly, frosting the edge of the fields in silver. You wake to a cold so sharp it makes your breath puff white in the dim light. Inside the cottage, the fire has burned down to embers, and the air smells faintly of yeast and cabbage. It is time to feed the jars again, to tend the living things you keep in the shadows. Fermentation is everywhere. It is in the bubbling of ale, the slow fizz of sauerkraut, the quiet transformation of milk into something thicker and richer. You do not see the change, but you can hear it if you listen closely. A faint popping, a soft hiss, a whisper that tells you the food is still alive in some secret way. You lean closer to a crock of cabbage and catch that tiny sound. It feels like listening to the earth breathe. Archaeological findings suggest that fermentation was one of humanity's oldest partnerships. Long before written language, people were already burying grains in damp pits, finding that something wondrous happened when time and air met. By the Middle Ages, this mystery had turned into routine. Every peasant home knew how to ferment, even if no one could explain why it worked. To them, it was as natural as breathing. You recall the first time you helped your mother prepare cabbage for winter. The kitchen smelled sharp, the salt stinging your hands as you rubbed it into the leaves. She told you to listen for the sound of bubbles after a few days. When they came, she smiled and said the spirits were pleased. You never asked which spirits she meant. Perhaps they were just names for the invisible magic that science would one day call fermentation. One curious detail you notice is how alive everything feels during this process. The jars hum faintly when the room warms up, as if the food inside is restless. Sometimes, the lids bulge slightly, and a bit of liquid spills over. It looks messy, but it is a good sign. It means transformation is happening. The food is not dying, it is evolving into something that can outlast the winter. You check on your ale next. The wooden cask sits in the corner, the smell of malt and fruit rising from its plug. You taste a little with the tip of a ladle. It is warm, still young, but already it carries a soft sweetness that promises comfort in the cold months ahead. You remember the alewives who sell their brew in clay jugs at market, their aprons stained with yeast. Their laughter fills the air while coins clink in wooden bowls. In a world of scarcity, they have found a way to turn decay into wealth. Medieval writings from monastic breweries reveal that monks studied fermentation carefully. They recorded the timing of each stage, the temperature of the rooms, the kind of barrels that gave the best flavor. Yet even their precise notes describe the process as guided by providence, as if divine hands stirred the brew. Perhaps faith was just another way of describing patience. A charming oddity persists among villagers. Some believe that if a batch ferments too fast, it means the household has quarreled. Too much shouting in the house, they say, stirs the spirits in the jars. So people speak softly when brewing or fermenting, as if calm voices ensure calm food. You find yourself whispering without realizing it, your tone gentle, your hands steady. Maybe there is truth in the habit. As the day lengthens, you move between your crocks and casks, checking each one. The smells blend together: sharp cabbage, sweet malt, a hint of sour milk, and somehow they belong to each other. The air feels warm, heavy with the scent of life-changing shape. You think about how these small transformations mirror your own endurance. Both require time, faith, and quiet attention. Modern researchers continue to discuss whether medieval peasants truly understood fermentation as a living process. Some evidence suggests they noticed patterns in temperature and timing. Others believe they relied only on observation and luck. Either way, they learned what mattered most: how to listen, how to wait, and how to taste for readiness. You realize that knowledge can be perfect without being written. You pour a small cup of ale and sit near the fire. The drink is cloudy but rich, with a sweetness that warms your chest. The bubbles tickle your tongue, proof that something unseen has worked its quiet miracle. You smile to yourself, thinking how strange it is that you can consume life in this way, food and drink still softly alive, feeding you with their motion. Outside, frost still coats the ground, glittering under the moonlight. Inside, your jars and barrels hum softly like a chorus. Each sound marks another moment conquered, another meal made safe. You pull your wool blanket around your shoulders and close your eyes, feeling grateful for every unseen helper, yeast, bacteria, air, time, all the quiet collaborators that keep hunger at bay. The night deepens. The cottage creaks as the wind presses against its walls. Somewhere inside, a jar pops as gas escapes. It startles you at first, then makes you laugh. The sound is a promise. Your food is alive, and so are you. You settle back down, lulled by the faint bubbling rhythm that fills the silence. In a world without machines, that gentle hiss is the sound of survival. The sun returns at last, slow and golden, melting the last of the frost from the thatched roofs. You step outside, and the air tastes clean again, washed of smoke and snow. The fields beyond the cottage shimmer with a green so tender it almost hurts to look at. You take a deep breath and smile, because this is the season of drying, of turning sunlight itself into a tool. You carry a basket of small fish towards the stream. They are slick in your hands, cold and faintly metallic. Soon they will change from fragile flesh to something leathery and strong enough to last half a year. The trick, you remind yourself, is patience and the right kind of heat. Not too hot, or the food hardens too fast and spoils from within. Not too cool, or it turns sour before the work is done. Chroniclers of the 14th century recorded how peasants in coastal towns spread fish along wooden racks, letting the wind and sun do the work of fire. Inland, others sliced apples, pears, and plums, laying them out on linen sheets or woven mats. Drying was a rhythm of breath and light, a slow dance between warmth and waiting. You imagine that if you listen closely, you could hear the sound of water leaving the fruit, a quiet sigh of surrender. A curious practice from the southern villages tells of people placing their drying trays on rooftops lined with rosemary branches. The scent from the herbs kept flies away, and some believed it also blessed the food with protection. Whether that is true or not, the fragrance must have been wonderful. You consider trying it yourself. You walk back to your yard and lay your fish in neat rows across a clean net. The smell is sharp, but the breeze softens it. Each scale catches the sunlight like a tiny mirror. Children passing by wrinkle their noses, but you smile. In a few days, that same smell will mean nourishment, not waste. You hang fruit beside the fish. A strange combination, perhaps, but every bit of space matters. Archaeological discoveries from medieval marketplaces suggest that dried goods were traded far more widely than most imagine. Dried peas, herbs, and salted fish traveled hundreds of miles along rough roads. Merchants packed them in sacks lined with straw or cloth soaked in oil to keep out moisture. These humble goods were the backbone of commerce long before anyone had heard of canned food. The dried smell of summer filled wagons that rolled through snow. An odd little belief lingers in your village. If the first batch of dried fruit of the season shrivels evenly, the harvest will be kind. If it dries unevenly or turns black, the year will bring storms. You do not know if that is true, but when you check your plums, they are perfect, soft, and golden at the edges. You decide that is a good omen. You work slowly, turning each piece when the sun rises high. Sweat beads along your neck, but it feels pure, earned. This is the kind of labor that hums quietly in your bones. No tools needed, no strange chemicals, only patience and air. You are reminded that nature can be an ally if you move in its rhythm instead of rushing it. Some modern historians point out that drying was not just about survival, but also about culture. In regions where sunlight was generous, dried fruits appeared at feasts as rare treats. a glimpse of summer in the dead of winter. In colder lands, dried mushrooms and roots flavored stews when nothing fresh could grow. Food preservation, you realize, was never only practical, it was emotional. Every jar, every bundle of dried herbs, carried memories of sunlight. By afternoon, the scent of drying fruit fills the cottage. It mixes with the smell of warm wood and soil. You can almost taste sweetness in the air. The fish near the door have already begun to stiffen. You turn them gently, careful not to tear the delicate skin. The wind rustles through the yard, whispering like an old friend. As evening falls, you gather the trays and carry them indoors. The food must finish drying near the hearth overnight, safe from dew and thieving animals. The room glows softly with the last of the sunlight filtering through the shutters. You place each tray carefully on a stool near the fire. The warmth licks the air but does not scorch. You feel content. Everything smells alive, yet calmer now, subdued. Scholars continue to discuss how much of this knowledge was shared between regions. Some believe merchants spread techniques from the Mediterranean northward. Others think peasants discovered them independently, guided by instinct and necessity. The truth may lie somewhere between, hidden in the smoke and wind of forgotten kitchens. You decide that every place must have learned from its own sky. You sit by the fire, hands resting on your knees. The crackle of wood mingles with the faint hiss of drying food. It is a simple sound, yet it fills the cottage like music. You close your eyes and imagine the warmth stored inside those slices of plum, ready to return when winter comes. It feels like bottling sunlight, saving brightness for darker days. Outside, the last light fades, leaving only a faint orange glow on the horizon. You look once more at your trays, nodding with quiet pride. They hold the summer itself, transformed by time and care. Tomorrow you will stack the dried pieces in linen bags and hang them from the rafters beside the smoked meat and salted pork. The cottage will smell like endurance, a mix of earth, air, and patience. You smile, knowing the sun has done its part. The mornings grow cooler again, and the scent of damp soil lingers longer each day. You pull your cloak tighter as you step outside, your breath faint in the chill. The fields glisten with dew, the grass bowing under the weight of it. You know what this means. The time has come to retreat underground, to trust the quiet safety of the earth itself. Your cellar waits like a patient animal beneath the cottage. Its entrance is hidden behind a low wooden door, half buried in moss and leaves. You open it carefully, and the smell of cool stone and packed earth greets you. The air is dense, heavy with stillness. Down here, the seasons move slower, as though the world above has forgotten time. You descend the steps, each one damp beneath your bare feet. The lantern in your hand flickers, casting gold ripples across the walls. The shelves along the sides are lined with clay jars, wicker baskets, and rough sacks. Some hold turnips, others potatoes, apples, or onions. The faint sweetness of fruit mingles with the earthy smell of roots. Everything feels solid, steady. Monastic records from the early Middle Ages describe cellars as essential parts of village life, often shared among several families. In those dark, silent chambers, people stored not only food but also hope. The coolness preserved more than produce. It preserved a sense of security. For peasants who feared the next harvest might fail, a full cellar was the closest thing to peace. You bend down and run your fingers along the smooth skin of a carrot. It is cold, slightly damp, and still firm. The earth that once grew it now keeps it alive in its second home. You arrange the vegetables carefully, layering straw between them to prevent rot. Every touch feels like a promise made to your future self. A peculiar belief survives among your neighbors. They say cellars breathe. At night, when the air above grows colder than below, the earth exhales through its cracks, keeping the food alive. You once stayed awake to listen, and perhaps it was imagination, but you swore you heard a faint sigh, a whisper moving through the barrels. Maybe it was the sound of comfort. You glance toward a row of apples stored in sand-filled tubs. They smell faintly sweet, though muted by the chill. You lift one and admire its sheen, almost metallic in the lantern light. The sand keeps them from touching each other, as if each apple lives in its own little world. Generations before you learned this trick by accident, when fallen fruit buried under dry soil lasted longer than those left in baskets. Mistakes become lessons. Excavations of medieval manors have uncovered cleverly designed underground chambers with air vents and drainage channels. Even peasants built smaller versions with simple tools, using clay and stones to shape their storage. These humble structures mirrored a quiet sophistication, proof that survival required both observation and imagination. The earth itself was a collaborator, a cool partner in every meal. You crouch beside a large crock sealed with wax. Inside rests the last of your brined beans. You press the seal gently, listening for the faintest crack that would mean air has sneaked in. It holds firm. You smile with relief. The wax gleams like amber in the light. That small shine feels like wealth. Above you, the cottage creaks as the wind picks up. A faint smell of wood smoke drifts through the gaps. The world above is restless, but down here everything is steady, timeless. You realize that the cellar is not only a storage place but also a sanctuary. The thick silence wraps around you like a blanket. Modern historians often remark on how medieval people viewed the underground as both sacred and unsettling. It was the realm of saints' relics and buried ancestors, yet also a place of safety. To step below ground was to walk between life and memory. You can feel that now. The walls seem to hum softly, as if aware of the generations who have trusted them. You add a few more baskets to the shelf and check the small vent near the ceiling. The air moves gently, carrying away the damp breath of the vegetables. The smell is comforting, faintly sweet, faintly earthy, like the scent of rain before it falls. You lean against the wall and close your eyes for a moment. It feels like standing inside time itself. An old tale says that when a cellar is built properly, it remembers its owners. If treated kindly, it keeps food longer. If neglected, it turns sour and damp in revenge. You have never tested that, but you always whisper a quiet thanks before leaving. Respect costs nothing, and superstition makes solitude less lonely. You climb the steps slowly, lantern in hand, the air warming with each rise. When you reach the surface, the day feels lighter, almost too bright. You close the door gently behind you, pressing the latch until it clicks. The earth below will do its quiet work now. You have done yours. As twilight deepens, you glance at the small mound of soil that covers your cellar. It looks like an extension of the garden, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But you know what lies beneath. A treasury of patience, a record of seasons carefully stored. The night settles around you, calm and cool, and you feel a deep sense of peace. Somewhere under your feet, life rests, preserved in darkness until the world needs it again. The sun slips behind the hills, and the bees drift home in slow, lazy spirals. Their low humming fills the air, a sound both soothing and purposeful. You follow them with your eyes, watching as they disappear into the hollow of a tree near the edge of the field. There, inside that living cathedral of wood and wax, lies the sweetest treasure your world knows: honey. You walk closer, careful not to disturb them. The scent of wildflowers clings to the air, mingling with the faint musk of warm wood. It is late summer, the last gathering before the cold months set in. You can feel the season shifting in the breeze. Soon the bees will slow, and you must take only what you need, leaving enough for them to survive. Medieval records from abbey beekeepers describe honey as both food and medicine. Monks guarded hives in stone-walled gardens, collecting the golden liquid with reverence. They used it to sweeten ale, to dress wounds, and to seal fruit in glazed jars. To them, honey was a kind of divine proof that nature still loved humanity. You believe that too as you reach toward the hive and smell the thick, sugary air. A local superstition says that you must always tell the bees when someone in the family dies. If they are not informed, they might abandon the hive. So, People whisper to them gently, as to old friends. You smile at the tenderness of it. Perhaps the bees like to feel included in the story of the household. You lift the comb carefully, the wax warm under your fingers. It glistens in the sunlight, golden and translucent. A drop of honey slips free and lands on your wrist, sticky and glowing like molten glass. You taste it, and it is pure sunlight, the memory of every flower in the valley. The sweetness fills your mouth, smooth and comforting. Archaeologists have found sealed jars of honey in ancient tombs, still edible after thousands of years. That small miracle explains why people once believed honey could cheat time. In your world, it feels like the closest thing to immortality. You seal fruits and nuts inside it, trusting that its thickness will hold back decay. Even when everything else spoils, honey remains steady. You sit by the edge of the meadow with your small pot of gold. Around you, the world hums softly. The bees drift in and out of their hive carrying more than pollen. They carry the secret of endurance. You think of the times honey has healed wounds in your village, spread thick over cuts and burns. It keeps away rot as if it knows something the rest of nature forgets. Chroniclers of the 13th century noted that honey often replaced coins in rural trade. A pot of it could buy a sack of grain, or even a lamb. Sweetness, it seems, had value beyond pleasure. In the lean months, it could mean strength, warmth, or the difference between sickness and health. When you barter with honey, you are offering time itself. One curious custom still amuses you. At midsummer festivals, villagers sometimes shape small wax figures and float them in bowls of water, asking for good luck in harvest. If the wax melts evenly, fortune smiles. If it tilts or cracks, trouble lies ahead. You tried it once, and the wax drifted in perfect circles. You have trusted honey ever since. You return to the cottage with your jar wrapped in cloth. Inside, the air is cooler, and the scent of smoke lingers from the morning fire. You pour the honey into a clay pot, watching it fold and settle like slow amber. It catches the firelight, glowing softly. You seal it with a disc of wax and set it beside your vinegar jars. Together, they form a small army against decay, sour, sweet, and eternal. Modern historians write that medieval beekeeping was a delicate craft, often shared between farmers and monasteries. The knowledge passed through whispers, gestures, and observation rather than ink. People learned by listening to the hum, by watching how bees behaved when storms approached. It was science wrapped in song. As night deepens, the bees quiet, their hive a still shadow under the trees. You sit by your window, looking out at the stars. They seem to shimmer with the same light that hides inside the honey jar. You think of the bees asleep in their wax chambers, unaware of how much they have given. You whisper a soft thank you, just in case they can hear. The cottage feels peaceful. The world outside hums with life. Yet inside, everything is calm. You dip a finger into the jar one last time and taste the sweetness again. It is as if the whole summer is resting on your tongue. You close your eyes, letting the warmth settle into your chest. Tomorrow, you will share a spoonful with your neighbor, and for a moment, the hunger of winter will seem very far away. The morning begins quietly, with mist curling low over the fields and a soft drip of dew from the eaves. Inside your cottage, the fire has been rekindled, and the air smells faintly of milk and smoke. Today is for transformation, for turning something fragile and fleeting into something that endures. You stand before a pot of warm milk and wonder, as countless others have, who first dared to let it spoil on purpose. You stir slowly, watching the surface ripple in pale circles. A faint sweetness clings to the air, mingled with the scent of wood ash. You add a few drops of something sour, perhaps vinegar from your own barrel, or a bit of whey saved from yesterday's batch. The change happens quickly. The milk thickens, curdles, separates into white clumps and golden liquid. It is a small miracle, quiet and complete. Medieval household accounts from both manor kitchens and monasteries mention cheese-making almost daily. It was a craft born of necessity, practiced wherever milk flowed faster than people could drink it. Cheese was milk made eternal, a portable harvest of the barnyard. Some monasteries became so skilled that their wheels of cheese traveled across Europe as prized trade goods. You lift the curds gently with a cloth, tying the corners and hanging the bundle near the fire. The liquid drips slowly, steady as a heartbeat. Each drop that falls is time distilled. The smell grows richer as the curds firm, faintly nutty, slightly tangy. Your hands ache from squeezing, but the rhythm is soothing. It feels less like cooking and more like prayer. A curious practice you once heard of from a traveling peddler comes to mind. In some mountain villages, people place carved charms beside their cheese molds to ward off misfortune. A crooked cheese, they say, foretells a quarrel or a failed harvest. You have no charm of your own, but you hum softly as you work, hoping that calmness will bring steadiness. You untie the cloth and press the curds into a small wooden mold. The pressure forces out the last of the whey. The shape emerges slowly, perfect in its simplicity. Tomorrow you will rub it with salt and let it rest in the cool dark of your cellar. Over weeks it will change again, growing firm, fragrant, and sharp. What began as milk will become memory, something to unwrap when the days turn long and bleak. Writings from medieval physicians praise cheese as both nourishment and danger. Some insisted it strengthened the body, while others warned that too much of it clogged the humors and clouded the mind. You laugh quietly at their uncertainty. It is strange how the same food can inspire both faith and fear. Perhaps that is why it tastes so good. Forbidden things often do. Modern food historians note that medieval cheesemakers understood much more than they could explain. They knew which seasons made the richest milk, which woods gave the best molds, which herbs could be mixed in for flavor. Many even experimented with aging in different conditions, using caves or baskets lined with moss. Without intending to, they laid the groundwork for recipes that still endure centuries later. As the cheese rests, you scrape the pot clean and taste the leftover whey. It is warm and thin, with a mild sweetness. You pour some into a jug for baking and feed the rest to the pigs outside. Nothing goes to waste here. The animals grunt softly in thanks, their sound blending with the low crackle of the fire. A strange thought lingers in your mind. Perhaps people first made cheese by accident, when milk curdled during a long journey in a saddlebag. Someone must have opened it, smelled that odd tang, and decided to taste it anyway. You smile at the bravery of that long-forgotten person. So many discoveries begin with a hungry stomach and a curious heart. By evening, the cheese has firmed into a pale round. You lift it carefully and set it on a small wooden board to cool. Its surface glows faintly in the firelight, smooth and solid. You run your thumb across it and feel a strange pride. This little wheel carries the story of your labor, your animals, your patience. It will last when other foods fail. As darkness settles, the scent of milk and smoke wraps around you like a blanket. Outside, the night insects begin their song, soft and rhythmic. You look toward the shelves where your jars, herbs, and meats wait in silence. Each method of keeping food alive feels like a piece of a puzzle, fitting together into something larger than yourself. The cottage hums with quiet order. You lie down, listening to the faint drip from the hanging cloth. It reminds you of rain, of rivers, of all the ways life flows and renews itself. The world above may be uncertain, but in this small space you have created constancy. You close your eyes with a smile, imagining future you slicing into that wheel of cheese on a cold winter day, sharing it with laughter and warm bread. Survival has never tasted so gentle. Morning drifts in slowly, carrying the smell of damp, ash, and crushed leaves. You wake to a faint rustle above the hearth, where herbs hang in tight bundles, their edges curled and crisp. Each bunch releases a whisper of fragrance as the air warms. Thyme, sage, mint, and marjoram fill the cottage with a scent so green it feels alive. This is not just decoration. These are your guardians, your pharmacy, and your pantry all in one. You rise, stretch, and run your fingers along the dried leaves. They crumble slightly, releasing a dust of scent that tickles your nose. Herbs are the quietest kind of wealth. They grow freely and ask for little, yet they flavor every meal, heal every wound, and sometimes, if you believe the old stories, drive away the devil himself. Manuscripts copied by monks describe how herbs were dried carefully above slow fires or in windowed lofts where sunlight could reach them but not scorch them. The records list thyme for courage, rosemary for remembrance, and sage for long life. These notes are part recipe, part prayer, written in careful Latin by candlelight. You imagine a monk pausing to inhale the same scent that now fills your home, smiling at its power. You pull a pot closer to the fire and sprinkle in a pinch of herbs to season a stew. The smell deepens immediately, turning the humble broth into something generous. Every pinch of dried green feels like a conversation with summer, a reminder of warm fields and buzzing bees. You close your eyes for a moment and remember harvesting them, your hands sticky with resin, your hair full of the smell of crushed leaves. An odd little belief from your grandmother comes to mind. She used to say that basil brings love, but only if planted by a woman who sings. You remember her soft humming in the garden, her voice mixing with the sound of insects. You never knew if she truly believed it, but you still find yourself humming when you hang new bundles to dry. Old habits carry comfort. You move toward the back of the room where a jar of ash sits on a shelf. It is fine, grey, and cool between your fingers. You use it not just for cleaning pots, but for sealing jars. When poured over certain foods, it keeps air away, holding back the creeping hand of decay. People in your village trust it as both tool and talisman. Ash from the hearth, they say, carries the spirit of the home. Excavations of medieval kitchens reveal layers of ash beneath cooking areas, mixed with herbs and bones. Archaeologists believe it was more than waste. It was ritual, a way to purify the space where food was made. You like to think of it as gratitude, a thank you whispered into the soil and fire. You crush more herbs into a small bowl, the scent growing sharper. Each one has a purpose. Sage dries the air around meats. Mint keeps flies away. Lavender soothes sleeplessness. You mix them together and feel like a magician brewing calm out of leaves. You tie the bundle with twine and hang it near the door to protect the home from illness. Whether or not it works, it fills the room with sweetness. Writings from medieval herbalists like Hildegard of Bingen describe herbs as voices of creation, each one holding a message from the earth. You think of that often when you work. Every leaf has a shape that feels deliberate, as if nature left you notes in green ink. When you crush thyme between your fingers, its warmth travels straight to your heart, and you find yourself smiling for no reason. A traveler once told you that in some distant lands, people dry herbs mixed with salt and ashes to preserve fish. The combination draws moisture away while adding flavor. You tried it once with river trout, and it worked beautifully. You remember the taste even now, rich and smoky, the hint of thyme lingering long after. Such small experiments make life less dull. Modern scholars point out that herbal preservation was more than a culinary habit. It blurred the line between medicine and cooking, showing how deeply medieval people trusted nature to heal and feed them at once. They saw no difference between kitchen and apothecary. To flavor food was to protect life. You nod at that thought, stirring your pot gently as the herbs bloom in the broth. The room feels warmer now, fragrant and alive. You glance up at the bundles above you, their shadows dancing gently in the firelight. They look like blessings suspended in air. The simple act of drying and saving what the earth gives has turned your home into a living archive of the seasons. As evening falls, you take one of the dried bundles and crush it into a fine powder. You sprinkle it into a small jar of oil, swirling until the liquid turns green gold. The scent fills the space, soft and soothing. You dip a cloth into it and wipe your table clean, smiling at how even cleaning becomes a kind of ritual. When you finally sit by the fire, the air feels heavy with comfort. The mingling scents of herbs and smoke weave around you like invisible threads. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, letting calm seep into your bones. Above you, the bundles sway gently, as if nodding in approval. In their stillness, you feel the heartbeat of the summer that made them, still alive, still kind. Winter arrives quietly at first, with a white mist that creeps low across the fields and settles in the hollows. The morning air feels heavy, and even the animals move slower. You step outside, your breath curling like smoke, and look toward the pale horizon. The soil is frozen, the trees are bare, and the sound of the stream has softened into a whisper beneath a thin layer of ice. You pull your cloak tighter and head back inside, where the only warmth lives. Your cottage glows faintly with the light of the hearth. Around you are the fruits of your year's labor, jars, sacks, and bundles that hang like quiet promises. Every preserved morsel now becomes your lifeline. You lift the lid of a pot and breathe in the familiar smell of vinegar and herbs. It is sharper than it was months ago, but still safe, still good. You taste a slice of pickled onion, and the tang brings a little heat to your chest. Chroniclers of the period often wrote about the rhythm of the medieval calendar, where fasting and feasting ruled life as strictly as the seasons. Winter was the time when stored food measured not just survival but faith. On certain days, meat was forbidden, and people turned to fish, beans, and root vegetables. These church-imposed fasts, though spiritual in nature, also stretched supplies until the thaw. You think about how cleverly belief and practicality have intertwined. You check the meat hanging by the rafters, its surface hard and dry. The smoke from your hearth has kept it dark and rich. You cut a small piece to test, slicing through the crust to reveal deep red within. The smell is strong but comforting. You fry it in a pan with onions and dried herbs, the sizzle filling the silence like laughter. An odd tradition in your village holds that the first meal cooked on the day of the first frost must be shared with a neighbor, or bad luck will follow. You glance at the door and decide to bring a bowl to the widow who lives 2 cottages away. She always trades you milk when your own cow runs dry, and it feels right to repay the kindness. The cold bites your cheeks as you step outside, the bowl steaming in your hands. She opens the door with a smile that feels like spring. When you return, you feel lighter. The cottage seems warmer, as if good deeds stoke the fire as much as wood. You sit at the table and pour a cup of ale, the liquid dark and smooth. You sip slowly, thinking of all the hands that have made your survival possible. The brewer, the salt merchant, the beekeeper, the farmer. In truth, no one lives through winter alone. Medieval records show that villagers often gathered for communal meals during the coldest months. Each person brought what they could spare, and the food was shared freely. These small feasts were both necessity and joy, reminders that companionship could chase away the chill. You imagine the sound of laughter echoing through wooden halls, the smell of stew and smoke rising together like hope. A curious superstition says that if you leave a small piece of bread on the window ledge at night, spirits will bless your pantry and keep mice away. You decide to try it, placing the crust carefully beside the frost-glazed window. Whether it works or not hardly matters. The gesture feels gentle, and you find comfort in the thought of unseen helpers. Later, you sit near the hearth and begin to count your stores. 1 basket of turnips still good, 2 sacks of barley half full. The honey jar remains heavy, though you have dipped into it on cold mornings for strength. You wrap your hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into your palms. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, the air hums softly with the crackle of fire. Modern researchers have noted how the medieval winter diet shifted between scarcity and celebration. After months of restraint, Christmas and Epiphany brought feasts that glowed with excess. For a brief moment, even peasants tasted abundance. Then, just as quickly, the rhythm of modest meals returned. Life moved in cycles, not of wealth but of gratitude. As the night deepens, you think of the spring that will come. The cellars will empty, the jars will lighten, and once again the fields will ask for your labor. But tonight, you are safe. You look around your small home, the shadows soft and kind, the shelves steady under their weight. Everything you save now saves you in return. You lie down close to the fire, listening to the slow rhythm of the logs. The air smells of herbs and smoke, faintly sweet. Through the window, the moon glows pale and round, lighting the frost outside like silver dust. You close your eyes with a quiet sigh, the warmth of your work wrapping around you. Winter may be long, but you have already won half the battle. The rest will come one quiet meal at a time. The snow begins to melt, dripping from the roof in slow, steady drops. You step outside and listen to the water run in thin silver lines through the mud. The world smells clean again, sharp with new air and thawing earth. You take a deep breath and smile. Winter's hold is breaking, and soon the merchants will return to the roads. For now, though, you think of the barrels that kept you alive while the world slept. You push open the door to the small shed where you store your casks. Inside, the scent of brine and wood greets you. Rows of barrels stand like quiet soldiers, their sides slick with salt residue. You rest your hand on one and feel the cool firmness of the wood. Each of these vessels is a world in itself, holding the memory of oceans and harvests. Medieval trade records from coastal towns describe how barrels of salted fish and wine moved across continents long before refrigeration was imagined. Ships carried them from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, from England to France, from one monastery to another. Salt fish was the heartbeat of commerce. Its smell so strong that people joked you could follow a merchant by scent alone. You pry open the lid of a barrel and inhale the thick, mineral air. Inside, the fish gleam faintly beneath layers of brine. You lift one carefully, its skin firm, its flesh still pale. It has lasted months untouched by rot, proof that salt and wood have done their work well. You marvel at the simple beauty of it, this preservation through patience and distance. A peculiar fact often told in port taverns is that barrels themselves became symbols of trust. A merchant's reputation could be judged by how tightly his casks were sealed. Some even carved small marks into the staves, their personal signatures burned into the grain. You trace the faint circle carved into your own barrels, proud of the craft that keeps food alive across oceans. You pour a bit of brine into a bowl, tasting its sharpness. It stings your tongue, but it also speaks of faraway waves and sun-bleached docks. You imagine the hands that packed this fish, the sailors who hauled it across rough waters, the markets where it changed from necessity to luxury. In every grain of salt lies a fragment of travel, a reminder that survival is often a shared enterprise. Archaeologists studying medieval trade routes have found remnants of barrel hoops and salted residue even in mountain regions, far from any coast. These traces reveal how preservation shaped the economy itself, allowing ideas and flavors to travel as freely as goods. Without these barrels, the world would have remained smaller, more fragile. You fill a jug from one of the wine casks and take a sip. It tastes faintly of oak and thyme. Wine, like fish, carries its own memory of motion. Some of it has aged well, some has soured into vinegar, but even that is useful. Nothing truly goes to waste when every change becomes a new tool. A traveler once told you that in Venice, certain merchants grew rich by trading only in barrels. They never touched the food inside, yet their influence reached kings. You find that strangely poetic. The container itself, once just wood and iron, became a symbol of power. Preservation, you realize, can shape not just meals but entire empires. Modern scholars suggest that the rise of preserved trade goods marked one of the first forms of globalization. Salted fish from northern waters ended up on southern tables. Olive oil from Italy reached English abbeys. Each barrel carried not only food but culture, taste, and language. You imagine how strange and thrilling those foreign flavors must have felt to people who never left their villages. You close the lid of the barrel gently and sit for a while in the dim light. The shed smells of wood, salt, and faint sweetness from the wine. Outside, birds call to each other as the air warms. You think about how preservation connects the humble peasant and the distant merchant. how both depend on patience and craft. The world is stitched together by barrels and trust. As the sun sets, you roll one cask toward the door, ready to share its contents at the next village gathering. The weight is heavy, but it feels like a kind of treasure. You will trade some fish for fresh flour, perhaps a bit of honey for new cloth. Exchange is its own kind of preservation, keeping friendship alive as surely as salt keeps meat. Night comes gently. The wind smells faintly of sea and soil. You sit on the step outside the shed, watching the stars appear one by one. Somewhere beyond the horizon, ships still travel, their holds filled with barrels just like yours. You close your eyes and imagine them rocking softly on dark waves, carrying the quiet miracle of endurance across the world. The air sharpens again, but this time the cold feels different. It is not the cruel chill of midwinter, but the brisk bite that arrives before spring truly settles. You notice it in the way the ground crunches under your boots, in the breath of frost that lingers just past dawn. It reminds you of something rare, something only the wealthy can afford to tame: ice itself. You walk past the edge of the village toward the estate on the hill. The lord's land stretches wide, his manor large enough to cast its own shadow across the fields. Beyond the orchard lies a curious structure, round and half buried, its walls thick with stone. The peasants call it the snow house. To you, it looks like a secret chamber meant to trap winter. Inside, the air is heavy and still. You can smell damp wood and faint sweetness from melting frost. Great blocks of ice, cut from the river weeks ago, sit packed in straw. They gleam faintly like slabs of crystal. Around them lie barrels of fruit, bottles of milk, and a few sides of venison. It feels otherworldly, a place where time itself hesitates. Historical records from noble households describe how ice was harvested during deep winter, cut with saws, and stored in underground pits or specially built houses. The walls were layered with straw, and the floor sloped gently so melted water could drain away. Even in summer, the air inside stayed cool enough to preserve delicacies that common villagers would never taste. You reach out and touch one of the ice blocks. It burns your fingertips, sharper than salt, cleaner than smoke. You think of the hands that carried it here, soaked to the bone, shivering as they worked. For every luxury, there is always hidden labor. The villagers who cut the ice will never taste the chilled wine it cools. Yet they take quiet pride in their work, knowing they have captured something most people can only dream of. A curious tale told by travelers says that in certain parts of Persia, long before your time, people built great domes to store ice from distant mountains. They called them yakchals, and even in the desert, they held winter through the heat of summer. It amazes you that the same idea has found its way here, across oceans and centuries. Preservation, it seems, speaks a language older than borders. You watch as a servant lowers a covered dish into the snow-packed corner. He nods politely, then seals the door with straw. The air grows still again, as if the building itself is holding its breath. You imagine the delight of the Lord's family months from now, when they bring out chilled fruit on a sweltering afternoon. You smile at the thought, though part of you feels a twinge of envy. Medieval inventories mention that only the wealthy could afford to store ice, yet even peasants found ways to borrow the idea. Some dug small snow pits in shaded woods, lining them with leaves to keep meat cool a few extra weeks. Others filled earthen jars with frozen water and buried them beneath their homes. The knowledge trickled down quietly, adapting to smaller hands and simpler lives. You remember once helping your neighbors gather snow to keep milk fresh for a festival feast. The children ran ahead, laughing, scooping handfuls into baskets. The memory warms you now. The milk lasted longer than usual, cool enough to mix with honey without spoiling. The celebration that followed felt brighter, as if the cold had given you a gift. Modern scholars point out that these early ice houses were the beginning of controlled temperature storage, a step toward what future generations would call refrigeration. You find the thought strange and wonderful. To you, this frozen chamber is magic. To them, it will be science. Yet the feeling of awe will remain the same. You step back into the sunlight, blinking as your eyes adjust. The warmth feels heavier now after the chill inside. A few servants carry fresh straw toward the snow house, their laughter echoing through the yard. You catch a fragment of their conversation. They plan to sneak a sliver of ice later, to drop into their ale. You pretend not to hear. Everyone deserves a small luxury now and then. As you walk home, you think about the strange relationship between wealth and preservation. The peasants use salt and smoke because they must. The nobles use ice because they can. Both, in their own way, are chasing the same dream: to keep life from slipping away too quickly. The difference is only in tools, not in hunger. By the time you reach your cottage, the sun has dipped low, painting the snow in gold. You sit by the fire and hold your hands out to the heat. The thought of cold inside a house built to hold warmth feels almost poetic. You close your eyes and imagine your own cellar filled with frost, your jars resting against a chill that never fades. For a moment, you feel the touch of luxury, quiet and fleeting, like a cold breath on the skin before sleep. Outside, the wind carries the faintest scent of pine and snow. You listen to it hum through the cracks, and you realize that even without ice, your world still knows how to keep things alive. It does not need marble chambers or servants, only patience and the cleverness of those who refuse to waste what they have. You smile into the firelight, thinking that perhaps you have captured your own version of winter after all. The bells from the small stone church ring out across the valley, their sound drifting through the morning mist. You pause in your chores, listening to the echoes fade among the hills. It is a holy day, one of fasting, though you have already eaten a crust of bread and a sip of ale to keep the chill from your bones. You wipe your hands on your apron and glance at the shelves where your food waits in silence. Religion, you realize, touches every meal you take. You kneel beside the hearth, stirring the pot that hangs above the coals. Inside is a thin vegetable broth, flavored with onions, turnips, and a little dried parsley. No meat today. The church forbids it, as it does on many days throughout the year. To modern ears it might sound like deprivation, but for you, it is balance. These rules keep the pantry steady until spring, when the fields wake again. Monastic writings from the 12th century describe how fasting was designed to strengthen both body and soul. Fish replaced meat, herbs softened hunger, and long prayers filled the silence left by absent feasts. You think of the monks in their cloisters, their meals simple but never joyless. Their fasting, like yours, is an act of rhythm, not punishment. A curious practice in your village takes place before Lent. Families gather for what they call Shrovetide, a final celebration of meat and sweetness before the quiet weeks ahead. You remember last year's laughter, the smell of roasted pork, the way the firelight caught in people's hair. It was not gluttony but gratitude, a chance to taste plenty before choosing restraint. You ladle the broth into a wooden bowl and sit by the window. Outside, a few neighbors walk toward the church, wrapped in wool, their heads bowed against the cold. You know that by sunset they will gather again, sharing stories and perhaps a secret sip of ale. Even fasting days find room for kindness. Medieval parish records show how closely the church calendar shaped daily eating. Out of 365 days, nearly half were marked by fasting or abstinence. To survive that rhythm required careful planning, clever storage, and a deep trust in preservation. Fish salted months ago becomes sacred food. Lentils and beans, once humble, become salvation. You smile at the thought that faith and hunger share the same table. A local superstition says that if you break a fast without prayer, your bread will mold faster. You do not know if it is true, but you always whisper a short blessing before eating, just in case. The habit has softened into comfort, a small ritual that steadies your mind. You have learned that faith, like salt, does not need to be seen to preserve. You walk to the shelf and lift a jar of pickled vegetables. The bright colors shine through the cloudy brine. You remember the warmth of harvest when you first sealed it. Now, in the depth of the cold season, That memory feels like light captured in glass. You open it carefully, the pop of the seal loud in the quiet room. The smell of vinegar rises, sharp but alive. You eat slowly, each bite a reminder that patience feeds the soul as much as the stomach. Writings from early theologians often debated whether pleasure in eating was sinful. Some argued that joy at the table distracted from prayer. Others insisted that gratitude required enjoyment, that savoring food was a form of worship. You have chosen the latter belief. When you eat with awareness, every flavor feels like a small miracle. Later in the day, the priest visits the cottages, blessing each door with a sprig of rosemary dipped in holy water. When he reaches yours, you bow your head. The drops fall cool against your forehead. He notices the herbs drying above your hearth and smiles knowingly. You think of how faith and food intertwine, each sustaining life in a different way. Modern historians often remark that fasting shaped medieval society as much as farming did. By forcing people to ration, it created patterns of trade and community that lasted for centuries. You find comfort in that idea. What seems like sacrifice is actually structure, a rhythm that keeps chaos at bay. As evening falls, you light a small candle beside your meal. The room glows softly, the shadows gentle. You break a piece of bread and dip it into the broth, the warmth seeping through your fingers. Hunger no longer feels like an enemy, but like an old companion who visits to remind you of gratitude. The bells ring again, low and slow, calling the village to night prayers. You watch the flame dance on the wall, and for a moment, the world feels perfectly still. You whisper thanks for the food before you, for the quiet day, and for the promise that tomorrow will bring new labor and new grace. The candlelight flickers, and you close your eyes, the faint taste of herbs lingering on your tongue like a prayer answered in silence. The days grow brighter, but the air remains cold enough to make your breath visible. You step outside with a wooden bucket and pause as the wind carries the smell of damp soil. Spring is approaching, yet the world still hesitates between sleep and awakening. Inside your cottage, the last of the winter stores wait patiently, each jar and sack a record of endurance. Today, you will check them all, making sure nothing has turned against you. The first jar opens with a soft sigh, a faint hiss of air escaping. The smell is sharp and earthy, good and familiar. You relax, reassured. But not everything survives so kindly. In the corner, one pot has swollen at the lid, its wax seal bulging slightly. You lean closer and catch a sour, unpleasant odor. Spoilage. It happens to everyone, no matter how careful. You scrape away the wax and lift the cloth, wrinkling your nose. The vegetables inside have turned grey, their edges soft and slimy. You set the jar aside with a quiet sigh. It is not anger you feel, only acceptance. The world always reclaims a little of what it gives. Manorial household records mention spoilage often, not as failure but as fact. Even lords with vast cellars lost some of their stores each season. Mice, mould, damp air, or simple misfortune any could undo months of labour. You find comfort in that shared imperfection. The poor and the rich both bow to the same invisible hand of decay. You clean the shelf with a cloth soaked in vinegar and ash. The smell is sharp, but it speaks of order. As you work, you hum softly, filling the silence. Then a thought drifts into your mind, one passed down from the older women in the village. Food that spoils too fast has been touched by bad spirits. You have never truly believed it, yet every time a jar turns, you whisper a small charm just in case. Some of your neighbors burn juniper wood near their pantries to chase away evil. Others hang crosses made from straw over their doors. There is comfort in the belief that something watches over the food, even if no one can see it. You smile at the idea that perhaps your jars have their own guardian spirits, tiny invisible workers who protect what you cannot. A traveler once told you of an odd practice in distant lands where people leave bowls of rice or bread outside their homes to feed wandering ghosts. If the food spoils quickly, it means the spirits are satisfied and will not bother the living. You find that strangely reassuring. Even decay can have purpose if you look at it kindly. Modern historians have written that medieval people blended faith, superstition, and observation so completely that they rarely saw the difference between them. When food went bad, they did not separate nature from mystery. To them, rot was not just a chemical change, but a reminder of the fragile border between life and death. You feel that truth now as you scrape away the remains of the spoiled jar. You take a fresh cloth and wipe the table again, slower this time. The rhythm of the motion calms you. Every act of cleaning is a kind of prayer for the future. You know that not all decay is loss. The compost pile behind your cottage proves it. Rot becomes soil, soil becomes food, and the cycle begins again. Even spoilage, in its own quiet way, nourishes something unseen. You open another jar, one filled with dried beans, and smile in relief. They rattle cleanly against the clay, pale and perfect. You run your hand through them, feeling their smoothness. They smell faintly of earth and patience. The sound they make reminds you of rain falling on thatched roofs. These small successes restore your spirit. A curious superstition among farmers says that if you dream of mold, it means new growth will come soon. You hope it is true. The dream you had last night was full of green shoots pushing through dark soil. Perhaps the spoiled jar was simply a sign that the world is ready to begin again. As the light fades, you sweep the floor and add the spoiled vegetables to the compost pile outside. The air is cool and sweet, the horizon painted in pink and grey. You stand for a moment, breathing in the scent of thawing ground. It smells like renewal, not ruin. You return inside and sit near the fire, feeling tired but satisfied. Around you, the shelves stand tall again, clean and steady. You glance toward the empty space where the spoiled jar once Saturday. It feels like a lesson rather than a loss. Modern researchers note that even the smallest acts of preservation in your time taught people resilience. Each jar opened, each meal saved or lost, shaped knowledge that would one day become science. You smile softly at that thought, unaware of the centuries to come, but proud of your quiet work. You stretch your hands toward the fire and close your eyes. The crackle of wood fills the room. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once and then falls silent. You let the warmth sink deep into your bones. Decay will always return, but so will growth. The two belong to each other, and you belong to both. Morning light spills through the cracks in the shutters, soft and golden, dust dancing in the beams. The smell of bread baking drifts from the hearth, warm and yeasty, wrapping around you like a gentle hug. Outside, roosters call and children shout in the distance. Life is stirring again, and the village hums with quiet energy. Today is market day, and that means cooking together. You tie your cloak and step into the cool air. The ground is still damp from last night's rain. Along the path, neighbors carry baskets filled with turnips, smoked fish, and dried beans. The air is alive with chatter, the rhythm of trade and friendship. You follow them toward the square where a large fire already burns. The scent of smoke and roasting meat reaches you long before you arrive. Historical records from manorial towns reveal that communal cooking was a cornerstone of rural life. People shared ovens, fires, and tools, turning scarcity into abundance. One person's leftover fat flavored another's stew. Every scrap mattered. You smile as you watch women stirring great pots together, their laughter rising above the smoke. You join them, offering a bundle of herbs and a few pieces of dried fruit from your store. Someone hands you a spoon to stir a pot thick with barley and onions. The motion feels rhythmic, familiar, like music for the hands. You taste the broth and add a pinch of salt, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. Around the fire, faces glow with pride and soot. A curious local saying comes to mind. A full pot forgives many quarrels. You have seen it proven countless times. Even neighbors who argued over fences or wandering chickens find peace around shared food. There is magic in a stew that belongs to everyone. Hunger, after all, does not care who stirred the pot. You look across the square and spot a group of children feeding pigs near a pen. The animals grunt contentedly, their pink snouts shiny with scraps. Every peel, bone, and crumb has a purpose. Nothing is wasted. Even smoke has its place. Some of the women hold lids above the fire, catching the dark soot that gathers there. Later, it will be mixed with fat to make soap. You marvel at how the rhythm of survival turns waste into worth. Archaeologists studying rural settlements have found traces of shared cooking pits, their layers of ash mingled with bones, herbs, and bits of pottery. These were not grand feasts, but quiet gatherings, daily rituals that held communities together. The evidence shows what stories cannot always capture: companionship written into the soil. An old man nearby tells a story as he stirs his own pot. He speaks of a winter long ago when the village nearly starved. One family shared their last loaf of bread, and by morning, the grain merchant arrived unexpectedly with new supplies. Some call it coincidence, others call it providence. You prefer to call it kindness multiplied. Modern historians often describe medieval villages as systems of interdependence. Each household contributed to the survival of all. The blacksmith's fire-heated bread, the potter's kiln warmed walls. Your stew today carries the flavor of that truth. Every spoonful holds the work of many hands. The air grows thicker with the scent of food and smoke. You ladle portions into wooden bowls, passing them around. The sound of thanks fills the square. Steam curls upward, and for a moment, you feel suspended between hunger and satisfaction, between labor and rest. This is what preservation was always meant to do, to make generosity possible. As the meal ends, the women rinse their pots with water from the well, laughing at the stubborn soot that clings to everything. Someone strums a small lute, and a few voices hum along. The fire burns lower, crackling softly, its smoke rising into the blue sky like a gentle prayer. A traveler visiting your village might see only simplicity here, but you see artistry. The timing, the seasoning, the quiet coordination, it is a living performance of care. The firelight catches faces lined with both exhaustion and pride. Everyone here has known hunger, and that memory has shaped the way you share. When you return home, your clothes smell of smoke and herbs. You leave your shoes by the door and sit by your own hearth, stirring the smaller pot left for later. The cottage feels quiet after the laughter of the market, but the silence is kind. You take a sip from your bowl and smile at the thought that the same meal has fed every house in the village tonight. Before bed, you scrape the last bits from the pot and toss them to your hens outside. Their soft clucking sounds like gratitude. You pause, looking up at the stars. In their cold, distant glow, you think of the fire that still burns faintly in the square, the smoke drifting upward like a thread tying the village together. You close your eyes, warmed by the thought that as long as people cook together, no one is ever truly alone. The next morning dawns soft and grey. A thin fog hovers over the fields, and everything feels damp to the touch. You sit near the hearth, your breath forming small clouds in the cool air, and you watch a pot of milk warming slowly over the fire. It trembles just at the edge of boiling, and you think of how fragile it is. So much of your life depends on this fragile balance between warmth and spoilage, between change and decay. You stir the milk gently, remembering all the ways your hands have learned to keep food alive: salt, smoke, vinegar, air, time, and now heat. Each method is a kind of language, one that speaks without words. You are not a scholar, yet you understand chemistry better than anyone could explain it to you. You have watched meat darken in smoke, dough rise in warmth, wine turn to vinegar, and milk turn to curds. Every transformation carries a pattern, something the eye learns long before the mind can name it. Writings from early physicians describe preservation as a matter of temperament. They believed that heat, moisture, and dryness each held spirits of their own, and the balance between them determined whether food would live or die. You have no use for such philosophy, but you respect the idea. It feels true in its own poetic way. You lift the pot and pour the warm milk into a small clay jar. The smell is soft and clean. Soon, you will set it near the fire to sour into buttermilk. You smile at the thought of it thickening overnight, guided by nothing more than the invisible life that floats through the air. The same unseen helpers have always been with you, though no one in your time knows their name. Modern scientists would one day call them bacteria, but you know them only as friends you must treat kindly. If the air is too cold, they sleep. If it is too hot, they die. You have learned their moods through trial and error, not study. To you, this is less science than companionship. A curious belief persists among your neighbors that food can sense intention. If you rush or curse while cooking, they say, the milk will curdle badly or the bread will fail to rise. So you work slowly and gently, keeping your thoughts steady. Whether the belief is true or not, you find peace in its practice. Your food seems to respond to kindness, and perhaps that is reason enough. You glance around your cottage, seeing each preserved item resting quietly in its place. Barrels of salted meat, jars of vinegar, baskets of dried fruit, and pots of honey form a chorus of patience. Together, they remind you that knowledge often grows from observation more than explanation. Generations have worked by instinct, building a body of wisdom as solid as the stones beneath your feet. Archaeological studies of medieval settlements reveal traces of soot, salt, and yeast embedded in walls and pottery shards. Even after centuries, those residues still whisper the same story, that life endured not through invention, but through repetition. The art of survival has always been practiced by people who never called themselves scientists. You step outside for a moment, letting the fog touch your face. The smell of damp earth rises, mingling with the scent of your hearth fire. You think of how the world itself is one vast cycle of preservation and decay, forever balancing. The frost preserves the soil, the sun releases it. Rivers clean themselves as they flow, and seeds sleep in frozen ground waiting for warmth. You are part of the same pattern, both creator and caretaker. An old saying comes to mind, one your father used to repeat, food remembers the hands that made it. You believe it now more than ever. Each loaf, each jar, each piece of cured meat carries a small part of your story. The salt bears your sweat, the smoke holds your breath. Even when you are gone, the knowledge will stay in the food itself, passed on to whoever learns by watching, as you once did. As evening settles, you sit by the hearth again, stirring a pot of broth just to hear its gentle bubbling. The rhythm soothes you. You think about how strange it is that the smallest invisible things in the world can decide whether you eat or go hungry. You have never seen them, yet you trust them completely. That, you realize, is faith of another kind. Modern thinkers often debate whether people of your time truly grasped what made preservation work. Some say it was guesswork and luck. Others argue that centuries of practice built an unspoken science that needed no formal name. You do not care who is right. For you, knowledge lives in your senses. The smell of safe food, the feel of cool cellars, the sound of brine bubbling. These are truths that no book could teach. The fire burns low, painting the walls in amber light. You lean back and listen to the faint hiss from the jar of milk as it begins to change. Tomorrow it will be thicker, richer, ready for the next meal. You smile, warmed by the thought that life, even when unseen, continues its quiet work. You close your eyes, the air thick with the scent of smoke and warmth, and drift into sleep, trusting that your invisible allies will finish what you began. The wind carries the sound of hooves along the road this morning, a heavy rhythm that makes the windows rattle in their frames. You step outside and see a line of carts moving slowly through the mud, their wheels sunk deep, their sides heavy with grain. Each barrel and sack belongs not to the farmers who harvested it, but to the Lord who owns the land. You watch in silence, knowing what this procession means. The season of storing has ended, and now the season of counting begins. You follow the road a little way, your feet squelching in the soft earth. The air smells of wet straw and cold iron. The men walking beside the carts wear rough wool and serious faces. Some carry ledgers and quills, their ink pots swinging from belts like charms. The steward rides ahead, checking each load, making sure no one has kept more than their due. For peasants, preservation is survival. For nobles, it is power. Old manorial rolls, still kept in dusty chests, record every grain weighed and every cask sealed under the Lord's authority. The entries read like a language of control. Measures, portions, taxes in kind. A full granary means wealth, and wealth means influence. Whoever commands the food commands the people. You can feel that truth as plainly as the chill air on your face. You walk back toward the village and past the communal oven. The baker's wife stands outside, her arms dusted with flour, watching the carts too. She sighs, muttering that the steward will take more than his share. You nod in sympathy. Everyone knows the rhythm of hunger is not determined only by weather, but by ownership. A curious rumor often circulates on days like this. Some say the Lord's granaries never truly empty, that their rats are fatter than the peasants who work the fields. Whether true or not, the image makes you laugh softly, a bitter kind of humor that keeps spirits alive. You stop by the well and draw a bucket of water, your reflection trembling in the surface. For a moment, you imagine what it would be like to have a cellar so vast that you never worry about the next meal. Then you shake the thought away. You would rather live with hunger and freedom than fullness bound by someone else's command. Chroniclers of the late Middle Ages noted how famines often deepened not from failed harvests but from hoarded stores. Lords locked away their grain to raise prices, while villagers bartered tools and clothing just to buy back the food they had grown. In that cruel equation, preservation became weapon instead of shield. Yet not all power is cruel. You remember stories of good stewards who opened their barns in lean years, feeding whole parishes from their stores. Some even left their gates open at night, so the poorest could take what they needed unseen. People still light candles for them during the winter fasts, whispering their names with reverence. You find hope in that memory, proof that mercy, like salt, can preserve goodness as surely as food. Modern researchers studying medieval economies often describe storage as the first true system of wealth. Coin could be stolen or devalued, but grain was life itself. Every political decision began and ended with what could be eaten or withheld. You smile at the irony that the humblest act, putting food away for later, became the foundation of power. You step inside your cottage again, closing the door against the cold. Your shelves look modest beside the memory of the manor's granary, yet you feel a quiet pride. Each jar, each sack, each crumb of dried fruit was earned by your own hands. No ledger keeps track of your meals. No steward weighs your labor. Your wealth fits inside your home, and that feels like freedom. A curious local story tells of a woman who once fooled the tax collectors by sealing her jars with a mixture of wax and clay, so heavy that they believed them full even when half empty. They took her tribute and left her enough to last the winter. You grin at the thought. Cleverness, you decide, is another kind of preservation. As dusk falls, the last of the carts disappears down the road toward the manor. You can still hear the faint creak of wood and the distant shouts of men. The fields lie quiet again, and the smoke from the village chimneys rises straight into the pale sky. You sit on your doorstep, tired but calm, watching twilight settle like dust. Historians who study these small moments often argue that peasants understood the true cost of preservation better than anyone. They learned that every jar and every barrel carried both comfort and fear. To store is to plan, but also to surrender control. You nod softly, thinking how strange it is that something meant to save can also bind. Inside, your fire glows steady. You take a small piece of cheese and a crust of bread, eating slowly while the wind rattles the shutters. The bread tastes faintly of smoke, the cheese sharp and grounding. It is enough. You sip a little ale and feel warmth spread through your chest. Outside, the night deepens, carrying away the sound of the Lord's carts until nothing is left but quiet. You whisper to the darkness, promising to keep what is yours safe for one more season. The year turns once more, and the fields awaken in green. You stand at the doorway of your cottage, feeling sunlight soak through your sleeves, and you breathe in the smell of grass and wet soil. The world feels new, but you are not. Your hands still carry the rhythm of work. Your shelves still hold the quiet wisdom of survival. Yet, you begin to notice something strange. The world beyond your valley is changing. Travelers speak of new tools and faster trade. In the nearby town, people buy food in covered markets where barrels and sacks stand beside glazed jars from faraway lands. You visit once, just to see it, and the sight leaves you both amazed and uneasy. Rows of gleaming pots hold pickled vegetables, dried meats, and sweet syrups sealed so tightly that air itself seems forbidden to enter. Records from early urban merchants describe how preservation methods began to shift during the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance. With more trade came new materials: glass, stronger clay, finer salt, imported spices. These did not replace the old ways entirely, but they added polish, efficiency, and a sense of luxury. The knowledge once kept by peasants and monks was being gathered, studied, and sold. You walk among the stalls, touching a jar here and there. The glass is cool, smooth, and perfect, so unlike your rough pottery at home. The vendor tells you it was made by craftsmen who use fire hot enough to melt sand into crystal. You cannot imagine such heat, though you can imagine what it costs. For the first time, food feels less like a gift of the earth and more like a prize behind glass. A curious story told by an apprentice at the market lingers in your mind. He claims that in some cities, nobles now pay cooks to fill entire rooms with preserved delicacies, fruits in syrup, meat soaked in oil, fish packed in wine. It sounds like magic, but also greed. You think of your cellar, its air cool and simple, and decide that enough is always better than plenty. Modern historians often view this period as the beginning of a slow transformation. Preservation was no longer just survival. It became preference, taste, and power. The same techniques that once fed peasants now served the rich for pleasure. Yet in small cottages like yours, little changed. Smoke still curled above the hearth. Salt still glittered on the table. Vinegar still smelled of life resisting decay. You carry home a small jar of sugar, rare and costly. The merchant called it white honey, and it sparkles like frost when you open the lid. You taste a pinch, and the sweetness floods your tongue. It is delicious, but somehow empty. Honey still feels truer, closer to the fields and bees you know. You seal the jar carefully, not out of reverence but out of caution. Too much sweetness can dull the sense of gratitude. Archaeological studies of early modern kitchens reveal how these small luxuries spread unevenly. In cities, glass jars and fine salts became common. In villages, clay and wood remained. Yet both worlds depended on the same invisible laws of preservation, the same patient dance between heat, air, and time. Progress, it seems, was not invention but refinement. You walk back to your cottage at sunset, your feet sore from the journey. The sight of home comforts you instantly. The smell of herbs drying near the fire, the faint hum of fermenting ale, the soft creak of the rafters, all familiar, all good. You unpack the sugar jar and place it beside your honey. The two gleam, side by side, the old world and the new. A neighbor stops by, bringing news of travelers who speak of strange machines that grind grain faster than a dozen men. You listen, half fascinated, half uncertain. It feels like the world is speeding up, while you prefer to move at the pace of ripening fruit. You tell her about the glass jars and the sugar, and she laughs, saying that no one can eat perfection. Food should taste of work. You agree. Modern scholars sometimes argue that progress often forgets the hands that built it. Every great kitchen began with a peasant's hearth, every market with a cottage garden. You feel that truth deep in your bones as you light your fire. The future will change names and tools, but the purpose will remain. Preservation, at its heart, is an act of love. The night settles softly. You sit by the fire with a bowl of broth made from dried beans and herbs. The taste is humble but rich, the kind of flavor that reminds you of patience. You think of the world beyond your fields, bright with glass and trade, and you wonder if people there will still take time to listen to their jars bubble, to smell their bread rising, to trust their senses instead of clocks. You lean back, eyes half closed, and smile. The methods may change, but the heart of it never will. To preserve food is to preserve stories, to hold on to warmth and memory until they are needed again. Tomorrow's people will have their own ways, but somewhere, someone will still be stirring a pot, tasting the air, and whispering a quiet prayer to keep hunger at bay. Night stretches long and gentle, the kind that hushes even the dogs. You sit by the hearth, your hands wrapped around a cup of warm ale, and listen to the last crackles of wood as they fade into a faint glow. The world outside is sleeping now, the fields dark, the air still. Within these quiet walls, you feel the slow rhythm of the seasons moving through you, each one leaving its mark. You think of the salt that burns your fingers, the smoke that clings to your hair, the jars that breathe softly in the dark. All of it, every small act, has kept you alive. You rise and walk through the cottage, the floor creaking under your bare feet. Your eyes linger on each shelf and corner. Every preserved piece of food is a memory, a small victory won against time. There is the honey, golden and untouched, the cheese resting under a cloth, the herbs dry and fragrant. You brush your fingertips over them all, feeling the stories hidden in their weight. Centuries from now, people will have cold machines to do what you do with fire and patience. They will open metal doors instead of cellars and will store food in glass and plastic rather than earth and clay. Yet you know they will still chase the same comfort, the same quiet joy of keeping something alive a little longer. The craft may evolve, but the heart behind it never will. Scholars who look back on your age will write that peasants lived at the mercy of nature. They will be both right and wrong. Nature was your master, yes, but it was also your teacher. You learned to listen, to the crack of frost, the hum of fermentation, the whisper of air leaving a sealed jar. Knowledge grew not from books, but from listening to the world itself. You smile, thinking of the quirks and customs that filled your days. The neighbor who swore smoke had a spirit, the monk who called vinegar divine medicine, the grandmother who sang to her bread so it would rise. Some would call these superstitions, yet to you they were simply trust in the unseen. Everything around you has a rhythm, a breath. When you move with it, life holds steady. A single candle burns beside the hearth now, its flame dancing lazily in the draught. Its light glows across the walls, painting your jars in amber halos. You breathe in deeply, the air rich with the scent of wood and herbs. There is peace in this stillness, a rare calm that comes only when all the work is done. Outside, the wind sighs through the cracks like a lullaby. Modern thinkers may study your methods and call them primitive, yet the truth is far more tender. You did not just preserve food, you preserved time itself. Each grain of salt, each thread of smoke, each drop of honey has held a piece of a season, a fragment of sunlight, a moment of labor and love. What could be more human than that? You sit down once more, stretching your legs toward the dying fire. The warmth against your skin feels like an old friend. You think of the people who will come after you, who will never taste your stew or smell your smoke, yet who will inherit your patience. They will not know your name, but they will live because you learned to make time wait. You close your eyes and listen. The fire murmurs softly. The beams above creak as they settle, and from outside comes the faint hoot of an owl. Every sound feels sacred. The night no longer seems empty. It is full of breath and memory. You whisper a small thanks, unsure to whom, but meaning it all the same. Your head grows heavy, and the world softens at the edges. The candle flickers lower. You imagine the fields sleeping under frost, the jars resting in their cool corners, the quiet hum of life continuing unseen. Preservation has always been about faith, faith that tomorrow will come, that hunger will fade, that warmth will return. The fire sighs one last time, a long glowing breath that fades into stillness. You feel your body grow lighter, your thoughts slower, softer. The room around you settles into quiet, as if holding its own breath. Now, let the night take you gently. Feel the air cooling, the heartbeat of the earth steady beneath your floor. The world is safe for now. The jars are sealed, the shelves are full, and the stars are keeping watch outside. Let your breath slow, your thoughts drift, your hands rest. Sleep now, traveler of old seasons. Tomorrow waits patiently, as it always has. The fire has gone out completely, and the room rests in soft shadow. The air feels cool against your skin, but it is not unfriendly. Somewhere beyond the window, a faint breeze carries the scent of night flowers. You listen to it and feel your heartbeat match its rhythm. Everything you have done, every task that filled your days, has led to this simple peace. The jars, the barrels, the herbs, the salt, they are all silent now, yet you can almost hear them breathing, as though time itself sleeps within them. It is a quiet reminder that life does not end when the world grows still. It simply waits, patient and unafraid. You lie down on your straw bed and pull the blanket to your chin. The faint taste of honey lingers on your tongue, and the memory of the fire's warmth still hums against your hands. You feel smaller now, but not in a lonely way, only as part of something vast and kind. The same earth that holds your cellar also holds your dreams. Breathe slowly. Let your thoughts grow distant, like the fields fading beneath the mist. The lessons of your day will keep themselves. The salt will hold its promise. The smoke will guard your food, and the night will keep your rest. The stars outside shimmer like candlelight, and the quiet deepens until it feels endless. You float within it, light and safe. The world is whole, and you are part of it. Sleep finds you gently, as if wrapping you in the same patience that preserves everything worth keeping. Good night, traveler. Rest well. Tomorrow will rise warm and golden, and all that you have saved will be waiting for you.